Okay. Start the program, Jill.
Hello, hello, hello to everyone out there in the ether and beyond, in all of the world of cheesedom. My name is Jill Erber, and I'm the owner of Cheese Teak, and I'm going to be guiding you through this incredible tour of American Bloomy cheeses and Bubbly, because there's just nothing better to pair with a creamy cheese than a sparkling wine. And we're going to be tasting one of the most acclaimed, some would say actually the most acclaimed producer of champagne style wine outside of Champagne, which is kind of a cool little thing for Argyle to be able to brag about. So it's a pretty amazing wine we're going to be sharing tonight. Before we kick off anything, I do want to walk everyone through the process so that if like this is your first class and you don't know what you're doing, let me put you at ease. You cannot do this wrong. You're basically going to eat.
I can do this wrong.
Jeff always does this wrong. So we'll have our own conversation after. But you could eat these in any order in theory, and you're not going to screw it up. The wine is awesome. The truffle honey is amazing. This is just a win-win. This is not going to be a complex class. We're going to learn how these cheeses are made, which is a really cool ancient cheese making process. We're going to learn about our wine, and we're going to taste these 5 absolutely outrageously delicious cheeses. So the way the class works is I can see no one. Jeff can see, I believe, all of your faces, whoever's chosen to have their cameras on, but we can't hear you. The way that we will communicate with you, so you can ask questions, you can send in your comments to one another or to us, is through the chat box that you see on your Zoom interface there. So that is the key to communicate. Jeff, my wonderful husband over there, as almost always, I should not say always, because there are times when my daughter has womaned the dashboard instead of my husband. But for the most part, my partner in cheese crime over there is going to be reading all of your chat comments. He will be, I'm sure, laughing privately to himself because you all tend to be very, very funny. And then he will be passing along any sort of comments and questions to me. And so we will answer as many of them as we can. But also remember, those of you who are seasoned cheese class attendees, answering each other's questions is also awesome. So there gets to be this wonderful little rapport going between tonight's attendees, which is really, really fun. And that's basically the flow of the class. We're going to learn about our wine, taste our first cheese. We're going to take a step back and learn about the cheese making process. And then we're going to taste our remaining 4 cheeses. Any
Wonderful.
questions before we kick off our shout outs for the evening? In the beginning of every class, I love to do shout outs, especially now that we have people all over the country receiving our cheese kits. We will often get people they'll be doing the class here, and then they'll send it to a relative or friend in another state or something, and then they'll do the class together. And so there's very often these cute little shout outs that are requested. So we're going to have a few of those tonight. The first is to Mama Fran. Oh my gosh, Mama Fran visiting from Arizona. Very, very exciting. This is her first time this is the first time I should say that she and her daughter Laura have seen each other in over a year and a half.
Oh, wow.
Damn COVID. So they are rejoicing in their togetherness now. And one of the ways that they are celebrating said togetherness is with this cheese class tonight. So I'm honored to be part of your little family reunion there. That's wonderful. I'm very happy to have you in town, Mama Fran. Next, we have Mark. Mark, hello, from your wonderful wife, Stephanie. So you're in Massachusetts with your child, visiting your family. And Stephanie's here with her sister, Chris. And so I'm sort of thinking maybe Stephanie got the really great end of the deal, because she's like, didn't have to pack, didn't really have to go anywhere. And she's sitting here with her sister and drinking wine and eating great cheese. So very, very happy that you all are doing this sort of cross-continental thing, which is fun. And last but never least, our birthday girl, Becca. Happy birthday to you. I won't do any more singing. I don't even know why I started at that level. I'm not a singer. I think that's obvious, and should never have started that high. Anyway, so
I have
happy
a question
birthday.
for you.
Yes.
Mark is in Massachusetts.
Yes.
And Stephanie and her sister are here.
Yes.
And you think that's cross-continental?
Cross-continental?
Okay, it's
cross East Coast,
it's only as far as the Acela will go on the northeast quarter, but otherwise, yeah.
I was trying to maybe enhance the grandness of the distance between them. It's sort of romantic and wonderful, but just diminish it. That's fine. No, diminish away. All right. So happy birthday to Becca. Huge, huge birthday from Kim. Super, super excited to have you here. I love when people celebrate their birthdays with cheese. I mean, it's just the best thing in the world. So happy, happy birthday to you, Becca. Thank you for being with us tonight. And those are our shout outs.
They were all great.
Thank you.
Even the cross-continental one. All right, let's get to the stuff you know.
So let's go ahead and get started. Again, our topic this evening is American Bloomy cheeses. And by Bloomy cheeses, we mean the category of cheese called, more technically, soft ripened cheeses, but they are often referred to as bloomy cheeses because the exterior of these cheeses are actually in bloom with living mold that is velvety and edible and delicious. So we're going to be learning more about that process later, but today we are focusing on just American bloomy cheeses. This style of cheese is famous for being invented in France, the home of the soft ripened cheeses like brie and cheeses like camembert. But the style has been replicated all over the world, including, of course, here in our very own continent of North America and our country of United States. And so that's where we're focusing today. And some of the most delicious and lovingly crafted soft ripened cheeses are made right here in the States. And so I'm excited to share a bunch of them with you. We're going to be tasting ones all the way from Vermont on the east side of our country, all the way to California on the west side of our country, and a few smatterings in between. We're also going to be pairing our cheeses with an American sparkling wine. So the French are famous for inventing sparkling wine, albeit by accident. It was not sort of a calculated thing, but those monks, they're just wonderful people. The monks who invented the sparkling wine accidentally, when they did not ferment their wine properly and left it in their cellars, and all of a sudden the bottles started exploding, and they thought that their cellar was possessed by Satan.
But they still drank it anyway.
Heck yeah, they were like, man, that Satan makes some yummy beverages. So yeah, so at first they were like terrified and thought that they had sinned and were all going to be in big, big trouble. And then they turned out that they had just invented the most festive, fabulous beverage, maybe in the history of monkkind. So thank you to them. What a lot of people don't know about sparkling wine, however, is that if it were not for the British, we would not be able to bottle this wine. So it took the Brits back during the 1800s creating, during the Industrial Revolution, the early Industrial Revolution, the heat of coal fires. It was the only thing hot enough to get the glass to do what they wanted it to do and make glass that was strong enough to withstand the intense internal pressure of sparkling wine. Until then, the bottles would just explode. So thanks to the British and their amazingly tough glass bottles, that is how we are actually able to drink sparkling wine, as opposed to just making sparkling wine and drinking it out of a large vat. So it's a worldwide effort. We are enjoying, let's go ahead and get started with it because I can't wait for y'all to taste this. This is the Argyle Sparkling Rosé. It is a Brut. Brut is, there's a whole spectrum of sparkling wine sweetness, all the way from what's called Brut Nature, which means no added sugar at all, and very, very low residual sugar. So very, very crisp and very low in any sort of sugar content, all the way up to what is the beautiful word in French is doux, which means sweet. Okay, and then there's like super, there's everything in between, a whole spectrum. Brut is closer to the dry side of things. So there's just a very small amount of added sugar that happens during a process of making sparkling wine called the dosage process. And this is a very special process that takes place when we're making very special wine called champagne. And that process of making champagne is unique. It's actually called the method champenoise, or traditional method, wherein there's the first fermentation in tank, and then the second fermentation actually happens within the bottle. And that's how we get these incredibly compressed, very, very fine, very persistent bubbles. But that process of that second fermentation happening within the bottle is very, very time consuming. It's very, very expensive, and it's very, very error prone. So most people are not doing this process. These guys follow that technique. So it makes for wines that are just incredibly interesting in flavor, full of structure. And again, it's the bubble that sets them apart, that really fine, persistent bubble. So this company is not located in France. They are located in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. But the cool thing about Willamette Valley, Jeff, if you want to actually put up the map of Willamette Valley wines, it's number 1 on there, and you'll see the map of Oregon so that I can explain to you all a little bit about Willamette Valley. So Willamette Valley is in kind of the northwest section of Oregon, and it falls right in between two very high mountain ranges. And to the west is the Pacific Ocean and the very, very sort of chilly, windy, wet climate of the coast of Oregon. But that mountain range that runs northwest actually buffers the Willamette Valley from a lot of that sort of intense weather. But it's still a very cool climate, and it's still fairly high in rainfall. Very, very similar to another region famous for its wines, which is the region of Burgundy in France. So if you follow that, that longitude all the way around the 45th parallel, it is called, all the way around the globe, you'll hit some of the most esteemed wine growing regions in the world. And so Willamette Valley and Oregon in general is often compared to the styles of wines that you will find in France, which is a really good thing for Oregon, I think. So Willamette Valley, again, this is, Argyle is like, this is their specialty. This is where they live and breathe. They grow all their own fruit. This comes from two different vineyards in the Dundee Hills and Eola Amity Hills. So two different vineyards blended together. This is a blend of the three most traditional Champagne grapes, which is Pinot Noir, a red grape, Chardonnay, a white grape, and Pinot Meunier, which is also a red grape, which a lot of people
I want to
don't
interrupt
know.
you just for a second
Sure.
on the because then we're going to take the map down.
Please.
But on the map,
Uh-huh.
the two yellow dots
That's
show those regions you were talking about.
those show the regions, right? So I put these little yellow dots on that map so that you could see exactly where these vineyards are
Dundee
located.
Hills and what is the other one?
And Eola Amity Hills.
Looks like Ebola, but I know
It does not say Ebola. Let's not talk about Ebola
I
when we're
bet.
about to eat cheese.
Sorry.
It's okay. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to
So
stop.
yes.
the
So
map.
anyway, Willamette Valley, really, really beautiful. So this is their 2018 vintage rosé. And by vintage, we mean that once in a while, there are vintages of grapes or harvests of grapes that are so outstanding. And the wines produced from them are so special that they deserve their own individual bottling. And they are referred to as vintage sparkling wines. So if you get a vintage champagne, they don't make them every year. Sometimes the fruit is just great. It's not like, oh my gosh. And so they'll kind of blend things together. They'll blend previous harvest with this harvest, and they won't be as particular about the fruit. So this is a vintage, which means 2018 was considered fabulous vintage for these grapes in this style of wine in Willamette Valley. So this is the 2018. It's been sitting in the bottle for over 3 years while it was aging, which is really, really cool. I'm going to go ahead and open this up. So I've extended my little metal clip here off to the side. We're going to remove this cage. We're going to untwist here, open this up just a touch. Are you able to see this, Jeff, or am I too far off?
No, you can see
Okay.
it. And I have a question for you when you.
Okay, well, we're not going to answer that yet because I don't want my bottle to explode. So this is my cage. I'm going to take that off right there. Once you remove that cage, you want to remove this cork in good time. This is not the time to go and like do your taxes right now. It's under tremendous pressure in this bottle. And if you let it sit without the tightening cage on there, it will eventually expel itself. So let's not do that. We're going to hold this by the neck and we're going to twist the cork, and it's going to twist, well, it's sliding a little bit. It's going to twist very easy, and you'll start to feel it rise up in your hand. And, oh, that was a big one. Hold on. Okay, I sort of
Wow.
thought we were in trouble. I was expecting Old Faithful with that. That was a very explosive cork opening there. So as you can see, the cork is a very famous style of sparkling wine cork called the mushroom cork, because when you remove it from the bottle, it looks like a little mushroom. And that is because in order to hold in these contents, that cork needs to be so super, super tightly compressed, really fitted in the neck of that bottle, or it will shoot out, cage or no. So these are very fun. Yes, Jeff, you had a question?
Yes.
While I pour?
The grape types. So
Yes.
when we think of champagne, most people, I think, reference Chardonnay,
Mhm.
and then, but there's always a tiny bit of.
Not necessarily even a tiny bit. So when making even true French champagne, the Pinot Noir, the Chardonnay, and the Pinot Meunier are the three most commonly used grapes. But you have sort of a subset of champagne. One is called Blanc de Blanc. And when you have Blanc de Blanc, that means it is champagne made only from Chardonnay. So Blanc de Blanc is from the white grape only. And that means only Chardonnay, still champagne. The other is Blanc de Noir, which is made from either only Pinot Noir or Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. So it doesn't have to include all of them, but it has to include some of them. Does that make sense? So you can have true champagne made only from Chardonnay, only Pinot Noir, but typically you want to harness all of the characteristics of those grapes. And of course, if you're making a rosé sparkling, you need the red grape in there. You couldn't have a Blanc de Blanc rosé unless, I guess you could add coloring to it or something, but the coloring of the rosé comes from the skin of those red grapes. So the juice, when it's pressed, actually sits on those skins for a very short period of time, enough time just to extract this beautiful salmony color, to extract some of the fruity flavor and some of the sort of the structure and the texture that those grape skins are going to give you. And that's why this wine is rosé.
All right, so then the carry on to my question
Sure.
was, I'm looking at your percentages here, and this is the largest is the Pinot Meunier.
The Pinot Meunier is the largest in this region.
Is that unusual?
Yes,
Okay.
it is. So typically the Pinot Noir will be the dominant, but it's usually about a third. I mean, these are not like massively different percentages. The Pinot Meunier is 40 something, and then it's 30 and about 30. So it's not a massive difference, but I do believe it is unique for Pinot Meunier to be the dominant grape in a blend.
All right, before you taste and talk
you're
about
killing
that,
me.
well, we got questions.
Just like it's beckoning.
Okay, so Bobby wants to know,
Hi,
can
Bobby.
screw tops be used for sparkling wines?
Technically, yes, but you're not going to find a screw top that is fitted on, that I'm aware of, on a method champenoise, because it results in such high pressure, a screw top would not contain it. So I've had, for instance, Proseccos that have screw tops, because a Prosecco is very often sort of an infused gas wine as opposed to being a naturally bubbly. And the bubble is not as persistent and it's not as intense and fine and compressed. So you can find screw tops on lesser quality, like a Prosecco, not that all Prosecco is low quality, but a lesser quality Prosecco, they will sometimes put corks on. It's very uncommon.
Yeah.
Very uncommon.
Great. You can taste it now.
Okay, I can taste it now. So take a little sniff of this. So what I love about the smell of this is you can smell the earth. It smells very savory. You obviously get some fruit. You get the little tickle of the bubbles, but you can actually smell sort of the stony mineral component of this wine. And if it's one thing I love about a wine, second only to great acidity, is a great minerality, because I really like to sort of taste the earth. I like to taste the stone. I think it makes it a really, really delicious compliment. So I'm gonna go ahead and take a sip. I hope you're all sipping. Cheers. Cheers to you, honey. I love you.
Thomas and Colleen said I should keep asking you more questions so you can't.
Like right now?
Yeah. Well, before you drank it.
So again, if you look at this glass, can you see this, honey, if I hold it up like that? You can see how teeny, teeny, tiny those bubbles are. They're very delicate on the palate. They're not, what?
The bubbles were a little hard to see.
Oh, I know, it may be hard just to get that. But they're not, if you have it in your glass, you'll see what I'm talking about.
Your glass.
So it's a very tiny bubble, and what's called very persistent, which means it will just sit here and bubble and bubble and bubble and bubble and bubble like this, like for a really long time. But it's not an abrasive bubble. It's not one of those that feels scratchy on the palate. It's just a very smooth and delicate bubble experience, I suppose. So what does everybody think of the Argyle? We're getting good feedback on it? Pretty yummy?
I think people were drinking it before and complimenting it. We have a question.
Sure.
So Lizzie wants to know, is Pinot Meunier used for non-sparkling wines?
It is, but not as commonly. I mean, it's usually a mixer. It's usually a mixer wine. It's going to add a little bit more structure and a little bit more body to other wines when it's blended in. But typically you're using it in sparkling wines because it has great, great acidity. And so it helps to kind of pump that up. Because Pinot Noir is not necessarily known for its great acidity. It's known for
Chardonnay neither, right?
Chardonnay, it depends. It can be acidic, but no, it's not the most acidic. It's not like a Sauvignon Blanc in regards to acidity. So the Pinot Meunier is going to add some sort of legs and some acidity to this. So yes.
I don't know where this is going, but
oh boy,
Natalie says it's a good before work drink.
Oh, Natalie, I like where your mind's at, girl. Very cool. A good before work drink. I agree. I've also been known to drink whiskey before I go to work. So, I'm kidding. Kidding. Never do that.
All right.
All right. Any other questions about our sparkling wine before we taste our first
Well, let's
cheese?
take some more questions, but let's get into the Mount Tam.
Did you ever show the picture of the
I did.
number 0 of the wine?
I did 0 and 1. I haven't screwed up anything yet.
You're doing great, sweetheart. I just want to make sure I didn't leave out anything cool. No, I'm good. Okay. So our first cheese of the evening, I hope y'all didn't mix these up because they do look kind of similar, but Again, they're all fabulous, so you really can't screw this up. The tallest of our 5 is one of the most esteemed and beloved soft ripened cheeses in all of the United States. This is a cheese called Mount Tam. And I would encourage you to pick up your piece of Mount Tam if you have not already engulfed the entire thing. Engulfed? I don't know if that's the right word. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Pick up the Mount Tam and smell this cheese. It smells like fresh cream with a little bit of sourness to it, like a really fresh, beautiful, like a creme fraiche smell. I think I just got it on my nose though.
Let's see.
No, I think I got it.
You're good.
I definitely got it on my nose though. It's gone now. All right. So Mount Tam is not only a soft ripened style of cheese, so you can tell this by the white, velvety, downy rind on the outside, but it is also what we refer to as a triple cream. And so for those of you going, oh my God, I love triple cream, there's a reason that they are so beloved. A triple cream means that the milk has extra cream added to it before it's turned into cheese. And it's a way to amp up that butter fat to make a cheese that is more akin to room temperature butter, really, than it is to a typical cheese. So you're talking about fat percentages upwards of 75% butter fat. And that's just in the dry matter of the cheese. So these cheeses also have a lot of moisture in them, a lot of water. So just in the dry part, it's 75% butter fat. And so to compare that to like American style butter is about 80% butter fat, but each percent makes a really big difference. So, but this is about the closest to butter that you're going to get without actually eating butter. This is made from organic pasteurized cow's milk. All of the cheeses that we're having this evening are pasteurized, and that is due primarily to the fact that they are so young. So they're all fairly small in format, and therefore they age really, really quickly. So these are all just aged in like the single digits of weeks. In order for a cheese to be made from unpasteurized milk here in the United States, it has to be aged for at least 2 months. So this is why we will not see really soft, squishy, gooey cheeses like this here in the States that are also unpasteurized. Jeff, I just realized I forgot something.
Uh-oh.
I brought home all my beautiful cheeses as my props.
Oh, okay.
And they're in the fridge, and I'm tethered.
I'm
tethered. I can't reach them, but I want to show you all, because you all get cuts of cheeses. They look exactly like my pieces because I just get one of the kits as well. But I do like to, when I can, bring home whole pieces of the cheeses so that you can see what they're like in their intact form. So here's my bag of goodness here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Love it. Wonderful. You're a good man. I appreciate that. Okay. Now we're back on track. Okay, so I'll show these off to you as we move through. So this is a wheel of Mount Tam in its full form. It's wrapped in this beautiful cheese paper. This is a cheese made by a cheesemaker called Cowgirl Creamery. And Cowgirl Creamery was founded as a partnership between 2 women who really wanted to capture the beauty of organic cheeses made in their beloved Northern California terrain. And so that is exactly what Cowgirl Creamery brings to us. They've been around since 1997, so for quite a while, which is pretty cool. And they are just famous for particularly their soft ripened cheeses, like Mount Tam. They do some seasonal varieties as well, like Pierce Point and Devil's Gulch. But then they also do a stinky version called Red Hawk. And if you've never had Red Hawk is literally Mount Tam that they then wash the rind on with salt water, and it grows this stinky bacteria on the outside. So it becomes a triple cream washed rind cheese.
Pretty
which
awesome.
Is unbelievable.
Now,
yes.
are they some of the first or the first American artisanal cheesemakers to kind of go cross-continental, one might say?
Never gonna live this one down. Dave, Becky, where are you? Are you not coming to my defense?
Bobby's making fun of me for making fun.
Oh my gosh. So Mount Tam, because it was founded in the late 90s, does not make it one of the quote unquote pioneers of American artisan cheesemaking. That was really the folks that started making cheese in the 1970s. So by the late 1990s, the American artisan cheese movement was more established. It was certainly not what I would call super mainstream. They were still getting going, and there were still those pioneers that had started, let's say 20 years before that. But Cowgirl Creamery became so famous and so beloved, and so you would see their cheeses lots and lots of places. And they really did go continental, so to speak, with regard to how you could find their beautiful
what I mean,
organic
yeah.
cheeses. Yeah, but they had, people like Laura Chanel had already been around for about 20 years by the time the Cowgirls came along. So this is just an outstanding example of both a soft ripened cheese and a triple cream cheese, which is it's just absolutely over the top. They make their cheeses in Northern California, right north of San Francisco. Very, very cool stuff.
All right, Lloyd and Marcia want to know.
Yes, hey, Lloyd and Marcia.
Let's see, how long would it open? Okay, so they're saying if you take that Mount Tam wheel whole and you, I guess what they're saying is if you open it or unopen it, let's say you put the wheel in the refrigerator, how long does it last?
Like
and then,
this.
Yes. And then I think I'm asking the question the way they want. And then if you cut into it, let's say you cut it in half, then how long will it last?
Gotcha. Both good questions. So because of the small format, it's going to accelerate in age pretty quickly. The Mount Tam that I have in front of me is relatively young. And I can tell this because the cream line, which is the edge of the cheese right inside the rind. The rind, as I mentioned, is a living thing. It's a living mold colony. And as it acts upon the cheese inside, it will make it become more and more gooey. And that gooiness begins near the edge of the cheese, and it creates this thing called a cream line. And mine has just a really beautiful cream line. You can see it's more squishy, but toward the center, it's a little bit more chalky and dense. But then as the cheese ages, the creaminess will become more and more dominant. And then to the point where it's past its prime. So this one is relatively young. If you put this just like this in your refrigerator, you could keep it for another few weeks, at least, maybe even another month. They sometimes put dates on them. This one is best by May 15th. They tend to be really, really conservative with that. And I tend to like my cheeses super ripe anyway, but it's up to you. But I would say you've got another several weeks on it if you keep it just like this. Now, once you cut into it like this, I would eat it within a week. Because once you cut into a cheese, it is no longer going to age or ripen. It's just going to start to break down. So you want to eat it. It will never be as good as it is today. So you want to eat it as quickly as you can once you have cut into it. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Perfect. If they want clarification, type in again. So, okay. So, and then just one other point, there's been a couple of questions about the eat the rind, and not everybody, multiple folks are jumping in saying yes on all of them, and just clarifying, yes, eat the rind.
So this style of rind, again, this soft ripened style of rind is 100% edible every time. That does not mean that you will love every soft ripened rind. Sometimes you may find them too strong in flavor. You may find the texture off-putting. Always, always, always try it. Don't be the person at the cocktail party that I'm not even going to do it, but I'm going to mimic that does this, that like hacks into it and takes out. Your father still does this to this day. I've been married to you for over 20 years. His father will still do that. I love you, Steve. He's actually on the class tonight, and I just forgot that. I love you so much. You're the best man ever. No. But it wouldn't be a class if I didn't make fun of him a little bit for hollowing out the cheese. So Mary Lou, please.
Genetic.
Please work on your husband. Too. Okay. It's genetic. Our daughter, our oldest daughter. Thank you, Steve. Our Ione does that too. Anyway, so don't be the person that hollows it out and just leaves the rind there on like the serving platter. Cut off a piece, put it on your plate, and then if you don't like the rind, you don't have to eat it. But it will add texture and it will add flavor. And you really don't think of it as like the exterior of the cheese. You should think of the rind as the cheese. It is part of that flavor and texture experience. So
all right. So Zach Evers says,
can I taste it while you're reading to me?
Zach Evers says, best one so far, which makes me wonder.
What have you been eating, Zach?
This is the first one, isn't it? I don't know. Maybe they're all going to be the best one so far. No, I put that all in my mouth at once. Was that okay?
I just did that too.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
We're both chewing though.
That's okay. I got to chew. Otherwise it just falls out of the front of my face. All right. So right away, the salt on this, I'm so in love with the salt on this. It's like perfect. The texture is ethereal. It's so light and kind of fluffy, and yet has a little bit of tooth to it, a little bit of chew.
Ethereal. I like that. Okay. S, K, and Q want to know. They point out that sometimes they will cut the mold off of hard cheeses.
Yep.
And in this particular case, they want to know, because the rind is the mold.
Right.
How do you know if it's, quote, bad mold?
It's a great, great question. So typically you want these cheeses to have mold on them. Okay, that's part of their existence. There are other cheeses, like if you get a harder cheese and it gets a spot of mold growing on it, and you can tell because it's not uniform on the exterior of the cheese. If you find that the mold is uniform on the exterior of a cheese, like it was kind of intentionally placed there, you can enjoy that. If you have a piece of, I don't know, let's say Swiss cheese or cheddar or something, and it gets a patch of mold on it, just scrape that off with a knife or cut it off and eat the rest of the cheese. It will not harm you. You could eat it. A lot of people just find it like, I don't want to eat something that has mold on it. But if I could have one takeaway from today, it is that cheese is mold. So if there were no mold, there would be no cheese. It's everywhere. It's on every type of cheese, whether you can see it or not, pretty much every type of cheese. So for the most part, you just want to scrape that off and then eat the cheese. It's just a little bit of the mold that lives there anyway, has just gotten a little bit frisky and started to colonize a little bit and start to grow. Completely fine to cut it off. Now, if you open up your tub of cottage cheese and it's covered with mold, throw that out.
Right.
Because that's a fresh cheese and you don't want mold on that.
So there was a question. Let's see where it was. I can't see who asked it. Oh, Thomas and Colleen want to know, is there a cheese you don't like? And I think other people have pointed out that there was the seaweed cheese, and you did not like that. I
almost still can't talk about that cheese.
So some of us liked it. You did not.
It tasted like morning sickness to me.
Oh, okay.
Every time I think of that cheese, it makes me feel like when I was sick and pregnant.
Yeah.
It was that bad. So this was a cheese from Ireland. It was in our Irish cheese class last March. And it was this very artisan-y, awesome cheddar cheese that was made with this very traditional Irish dillisk seaweed that they actually mix into the cheese. And it was so interesting.
It was briny.
It was so interesting. Yeah. So I would say I would never eat that again. Like I did not like it. I would not eat that again. Most every other cheese on earth, I could totally eat and be quite happy doing so. I can't think of any other one that I really dislike. But
to me, this is the perfect cheese. This is the perfect cheese. This is the anti-cheddar, and I don't like cheddar.
Jeff does not like cheddar, right? But like this is my daughter Liberty's favorite cheese, Mount Tam. So when she saw it was in the class, she was like, whoop, whoop. So yes, it's all good. All right. Any other questions before we jump into the making of this style of cheese?
Let's do it.
All right. So Jeff, if you want to put up our Bloomy cheese steps slide, graphic, whatevs, and I'll walk y'all through just quickly how the style of cheese is made, because I think it's worth understanding it to really appreciate the craftsmanship and labor and love that goes into creating these incredibly delicate cheeses. So I'm going to pick.
You're going to give me a second because I have screwed this up.
Oh, it's okay.
I got to find it.
Well, I'll just go ahead and start talking. So the cheese making process for Bloomy cheeses or soft ripened cheeses is the same as pretty much any kind of cheese, which is you start with milk. And the vast majority of cheeses of this style are made with cow's milk, which is not an accident. It is because cow's milk has very special properties that make it very, very conducive to this style of cheese. It has very, very long fat chains and protein chains that make this kind of complex matrix within the cheese and help to retain moisture and help to create this kind of stretchy, gooey texture. So this is why the vast majority of soft ripened cheeses on earth from any country are cow's milk. It's just easier to make it do what you want to do.
Graphic is up.
Great, thank you. We are actually having a goat's milk version tonight, and there are sheep's milk versions as well, but they're very, very rare. So the vast majority, cow's milk. So we're going to start, excuse me. So we're going to start with our milk. And if we're making one of these cheeses, especially here, excuse me, just inhaled weird, excuse me. All right, so if we're making one of these cheeses that's going to be consumed very young here in the United States, we have to pasteurize our milk. In other parts of the world, they would not necessarily do so. It's not required by law. So as a cheesemaker, I'm going to choose, let's just say I'm anywhere. I'm going to choose, do I want to pasteurize my milk or do I want to leave it unpasteurized or what we call raw milk? And so a raw milk cheese is going to be very full flavored. It's going to really reflect the terroir where this cheese comes from, where the animals are grazing, all of those wonderful sort of enzymes that get created by the bacteria living within the cheese are very reflective of the terrain and very specific to particular regions. And cheesemakers take that very, very seriously. So we're going to choose raw milk, pasteurized milk. We're then going to add some additional bacteria cultures that are going to cause our milk to sour. because we have to make cheese from sour milk. We're going to have soured our milk pretty quickly. We're going to warm it. And then we're going to add something called rennet to our milk, which is going to transform the liquid milk into a solid, also known as cheese curd, which is sort of the magic that happens, that transforms it again from a liquid to a solid. So then we have this sort of jiggly mass that looks like milk colored Jello. And then we're going to take that curd very, very delicately. We're right at about 6 o'clock on our little diagram here. And we're going to place it into the form that's going to give it its shape. It's usually a wheel. Once in a while you get, squares and things like that, but it's typically a wheel of any size. The thing about very soft cheeses like this is you won't get too huge, because if they get too large, you can't handle them. They get too heavy and you'll burst them when you try and pick them up or move them. So soft ripened cheeses can only be so big before they would, in a sense, destroy themselves by their weight. So they'll typically be a little bit more demure in size and or diminutive. Demure is the right word. I'm like synonymically challenged today.
That was a good word you might have made up.
I did. But you get it, right? Okay. So again, we've got our cheese in our form that's going to give it its shape, and we're going to leave it in there for just like overnight, just long enough for it to come together and hold its shape, so that when you take it out of the form, it still looks like a wheel. It doesn't kind of fall apart. And then we're going to add to the exterior the mold. And people will do this by literally, I think I have a spray bottle in here. They will like take a spray bottle with mold in water or brine, or not brine, away, and they'll spray it on the outside. They'll sometimes just kind of mush it on with their hands, or they will just put the cheese into a room where other more advanced cheeses are already aging, and the mold living on those other more advanced cheeses will flit over to the new ones naturally and colonize and begin to grow on the outside.
I have listened to you talk about cheese for going on 20 years now, and certainly these classes for going on 2 years now in great depth. I've never heard that before, or at least I didn't catch it the last time you said it.
Yep.
That's pretty interesting.
It is really cool. So it's sort of like the concept of the natural flora in the aging room that will just zip on over. That's why in our cheese cases, we segregate the blue cheeses from the other cheeses, because blue mold is like insidious and it will just pop all over your other cheeses. So we have to keep the blue cheeses in their own refrigerator away from the other.
And you don't
cheeses.
even mean just on like one side of the room. You mean literally.
Oh, no,
like
we have it in a different cold box.
Yeah.
Yes. So when you come into Cheese Teak, you will see that the blue cheeses are isolated, and it's because that blue will spread really quickly to your other cheeses. So, so this is no different. The mold will colonize on the outside, and it will begin to grow, and it will get like super, super fluff-tastic. And so you actually need to like pat it down or like wipe it off a little bit, because they'll look like little snowballs after a while. It's like the cutest thing ever. So you got to kind of tame it, or else you could like do its hair or something, I guess.
So Lloyd and Marcia asked, do you have to flip the cheeses so that
frequently?
Yeah.
It's a great question. So part of the labor that goes into this is not only all of the steps leading up to now, but as this cheese is aging. So let's say the cheese is aging for 4 weeks. During that 4 weeks, you have got to flip those cheeses over every single day, because if you leave it sitting on the bottom, it will get claggy and damp, and the mold will die. It won't be able to breathe. It needs to breathe. It needs oxygen. So you literally need to flip the cheeses over. They'll often be on wire racks, so they get the most aeration possible from beneath, but you still need to flip them over really, really frequently so that the mold grows evenly and it doesn't die on one side. So there's just a ton of labor that goes into these, and it's like by hand. You can't get some like big machine in there that's going to go, because they'll just smush them everywhere. So it's like a by hand kind of process of flipping these cheeses every day. It's pretty amazing. Okay,
so that process you described, Stephanie wants to know, can these particular cheeses she's asking, these the Bloomy, can they be made with a non-animal rennet?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Rennet?
Absolutely. So rennet is just kind of a blanket term that is used, but true rennet is animal derived. And so if people are vegetarian, although animal rennet is still, it's very much processed down. It's not like you're like throwing an animal in your cheese, but a vegetarian, for instance, might want to avoid, might want to avoid animal-based rennet. And so they prefer vegetarian rennet. And I think at least 2 of our cheeses today are vegetarian rennet. So vegetarian rennet is derived from plants. Things like the thistle plant is a source of vegetarian rennet and is used actually very, very frequently.
All right.
Yep.
So I think we should do Bloomy Breeze now.
I think we should do Bloomy Breeze. All right. So no more questions.
No, the questions are coming in, but let's
Okay,
see.
cool. Let's move on to Bloomy Breeze. So our number 2 cheese comes from right in our neck of the woods here in Maryland, in perhaps the greatest town name ever, the town of Accident, Maryland. Yes, it's actually called Accident. Could you imagine saying, oh, where do you live? Oh, I live in Accident. So yeah, it's a town. It is in far western Maryland, up north, right near the Pennsylvania border, teeny tiny little town. And there are 2 gentlemen there that make cheese, and their project is called Firefly Farms, and they have been around for, oh gosh, in 20 years or so. Let me see. I think I have when they were founded.
2000.
2000. Yes. So 22 years now.
Wow.
And it's a gentleman and his husband who founded it back then. And they started their flagship cheese was a cheese called Mary Goat Round, which is a soft ripened goat's milk cheese. But they have also made cow's milk cheeses. And so this is one beautiful example. So this is Bloomy Breeze. It's 100%, again, pasteurized cow's milk. And just this cheese is like it's just so tender. Ah, it smells like butter. And this is a great example, y'all, if you've already cut into yours, of like a great cream line. Okay, so you see how there's like the cream and it's kind of gooing out, but then the center is still pretty cohesive and a little bit more firm. Great example of a cream line around the exterior of that cheese.
So that cheese it's obviously different, but it's also much riper than the Mount Tam that's on your.
So this
tray,
would be
plate, whatever.
further along in its ripeness than at least my Mount Tam is. I'm going to cut into this puppy. So again, triple cream.
People are asking a little bit about what should they eat, quote, with the cheese. You just put it in your mouth, right?
Or put it in my
You
mouth.
could use the bread. You could use crackers.
So baguette is a wonderful combination. So earthy.
That's awesome.
Oh my
That's
God.
really nice.
You get more of an
Aged.
earthy,
Yeah.
right? The Mount Tam, I feel like almost had a sweetness to it.
Mm-hmm.
This
Yeah.
I got much more of the earth, and the rind
Awesome.
adds such an amazing flavor and texture to this. So yes, a crusty bread is great. I hope you all saw my little directions to warm your baguette in the oven for about 5 minutes. Makes a big difference, makes it nice and crusty. And we also have some beautiful truffle honey that can be drizzled on any of these cheeses. And it just takes it to a whole nother level of like craziness. But
Decadence.
I recommend first tasting each cheese. If you can, just pop it in your mouth. Don't mix it with anything, because the cheeses do tend to be a little bit nuanced and a little bit more delicate in flavor. So anytime you're going to mix other stuff, you're going to detract just a little bit from the purity of the flavor. So maybe take a bite first with nothing and then start putting the stuff on there.
All right. So these are all fresh cheeses.
Oh.
They age quickly and they're done quickly. So Natalie wants to know, how does somebody who owns a cheese shop make sure that the inventory is fresh and go through it? And, I think I asked that question, right?
Yeah. So you watch it really closely. So typically, we'll get cheeses that are wrapped like this, where you can't see inside. And they're harder to tell. They're harder to tell if they're starting to get a little bit discolored on the rind. In that case, you can use the expiration date as a bit of a guide. But I much prefer cheeses that I can see, like our Moses Sleeper here. So I can keep an eye on its rind, and I can see when the rind begins to get discolored in a not good way, when it starts to get too weepy, and I can start to tell that it's getting past its prime. But for the most part, you just control the number of different things that you carry. So they tend to be our most popular style, and everybody loves them. So the soft ripened cheeses tend to go really, really fast. So we don't tend to sit around too long. But I will admit, there's times that we've missed the window on cheeses for sure. We've had somebody bring something back and go, oh, I think this is past. And we're like, oh my gosh, we missed that. And you get them something different, because they will go from perfect to not so perfect in a week.
But
sometimes.
also the cheesemongers know when things are
Oh, for sure, because they get
they're both perfect, and
Yes.
they're almost they're days away from being
right.
not good, and they'll tell people that.
Yeah,
right?
and when they're in prime condition are the times that we're going to probably recommend them the most, because that's when they're going to taste their absolute best. So it works pretty well most of the time. But don't forget, they're also the same people that receive the cheese when we get it. So they see what it looks like right away in the beginning. They know about how much time they have on it. But yeah, it's a little bit of art and a little bit of science when you're doing that. Any other questions so far?
No more questions.
No more questions? Okay. So again, Bloomy Breeze was considered one of the best cheeses in the world at the World Cheese Awards in 2019. It won Super Gold, which means it was considered the best American cheese submitted out of over 4,000 entries. Wow. And this is the World Cheese Awards. So this is I don't remember where it was in 2019, Italy, maybe. It's a big deal.
That's great.
Big deal. They have judges from like 200 different nations. It's pretty incredible. Or 50 different nations, I'm sorry, but over 200 judges. So it's pretty cool. And you put up the picture of Pablo and Mike?
No.
So people can see who made their cheese for them?
All right, so this is graphic.
Yeah, so this is number 4.
All right, again, I did something with that. I can get it though.
Give me a second. So Jeff is going to put up the picture of Pablo Solane and his husband, Mike, who own Firefly Farms. And Pablo is really the chief sort of like cheese guy in the operation, but it's really, really cool. And again, anyone who's been doing anything artisan-y like this for over 20 years, they get my vote. Really, really cool. Do you get it up there?
No, don't ask.
Okay, I'm not going to ask. We'll just move on. We'll show you Pablo and Mike.
No, I'm going to do it. I got it now. You got to give me a second. All right, here they are.
I'll just drink while he's doing that.
All right.
You got it?
Got it.
Okay, so that's Pablo and Mike and their cheese in the background. Always like for you all to see who's making your cheeses for you.
Cool.
All right, any other questions before we move on to one of my favorite cheeses in the world? Although these are all some of
Wow, that was just like happy birthday. Oh, shit.
On the couch
I'm in trouble. Yeah.
Okay. Are we ready to move on to number 3? Any more questions before we move on? I don't want to move too quickly, but I think we're probably ready to.
Let's do it. No, we're ready.
All right.
I'm ready.
So
St. Stephen.
This is a cheese from Hudson Valley, New York, called St. Stephen. It's from a cheesemaker called Four Fat Fowl. It's kind of a mouthful. So I love the name of their operation. Four Fat Fowl comes from this part of Hudson Valley that was founded by the Dutch back in the 1600s, and part of sort of the tax that the local sort of tenant farmers would have to pay to their Dutch. They called them. Oh, what did they call them? Pontoons or
you wrote patroons.
Patroons.
Like patrons, but
yes. So they were patroons. So the part of the tax that they would have to pay every year was, a portion of their, they'd have to give some of their labor. They would have to give some portion of their wheat based on every number of acres they had. And they would have to give them 4 fat fowl was part of the tax bill. Can you imagine getting something from the IRS that was like, oh, you're delinquent in your 4 fat fowl tax. Please send those along right away.
I'd like to give the IRS 4 fat fowl.
I bet you would. All right. So this is 4 Fat Fowls, St. Stephen. St. Stephen is another one of our beloved triple cream, 100% pasteurized cow's milk. And 4 Fat Fowl was founded by a gentleman and his wife and his sister. So the 3 of them all he's the cheesemaker. His wife does all of the sort of the marketing and things, and his sister does all of the operations. So it's a pretty 100% kind of family operation there, which I'm sure is awesome most of the time. But I just love this because as I cut through this cheese, you can see its texture. It's so high in fat. It doesn't really get a mega cream line. So I don't know if you all notice that. If you look at this, even though it's beautiful and ripe, it doesn't have the same differentiation like the Bloomy Breeze did, where the cream line is.
And it won't develop that?
It doesn't really develop it as much. It's super high in fat. So it's more like room temperature butter.
Huh.
I mean, please.
Oh, man.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I should just go now.
Yeah. I like the saltiness of it.
So salty. Yeah. I love it. And it is just, it's like velvet on the palate. Oh, if you've not already tasted it with the sparkling. So one of the things, I jokingly refer to.
Drop the mic.
Yeah. I jokingly refer to, sparkling wine as like the soulmate to soft ripened cheeses. And I think, or I hope, you're able to see how beautifully they complement one another. There's some reasons for that. So sparkling wine, first and foremost, has bubbles in it. So when you're talking about cheeses that are super high in fat like this, that will have a tendency to literally coat your tongue and your palate, so you start to block out the flavors, you need something with these bubbles to cut through that and literally scrub your palate clean, so that then when you take another bite of a cheese, you can taste it, as opposed to it just getting all clogged up there. So the first is the bubbles. The second, they tend to have very high acidity, and that acidity also works with the scrubbing bubbles to help to cleanse the palate. And then lastly, they have wonderful, delicate flavor. So your sparkling wine is not typically going to overpower any other cheese or any cheese that you pair it with. It will just be a beautiful accent and a beautiful complement. So it's just a winner. So it's one of the most traditional sort of culinary combinations in the world. Oh, I forgot to show you all our other two cheeses. I'm sorry. So this is our Bloomy Breeze from Firefly Farms. So gorgeous.
So that one's a square? Oh, no, not really.
Round.
It's
Round. Just the wrapping is a little bit.
Yeah.
And then this is our St. Stephen from 4 Fat Fowl. You can see it's got 4 little fat chickens on it. So cute.
Let's see how fat the fowl are.
They're pretty fat.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, they're plump.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. So any questions about St. Stephen? Absolutely love this one. So our first 2 cheeses, our Mount Tam, someone asked this earlier, Mount Tam and our Bloomy Breeze are both made with vegetarian rennet. With the St. Stephen, we're moving to an animal-based rennet. And I believe the last 2 also have the animal-based rennet. Oh no, the next one is not.
So I'm just noting that so far, those first 3 cheeses, the company's founded in 1997, 2000, and 2013. So in the ancient world of cheese, this is like
very new.
Yeah, newborn babies, right? Yeah.
For sure. And even our next cheese, which is made by Laura Chanel, who is one of those pioneers from the 70s of American artisan cheese making, for her first couple decades, she wasn't making soft ripened cheeses. She was making fresh style chev cheeses. And so she kind of graduated into making aged cheeses. I don't know if it was exactly 2 decades, but it was not her first efforts. Her first efforts were French style fresh chev, which was unheard of here in the United States back in 1979.
And where was she doing this? Where was she doing this? Oh, Sonoma.
In Sonoma. So,
cool.
And that is our next cheese, which is a good segue, I think, to the Laura Chanel creamy goat brie. So it's just awesome. The great thing about a goat's milk version of a soft ripened cheese is, remember we talked about kind of the richness and the almost, I don't want to say if heaviness is the right word, but of the cow's milk. It's like a mouthful. Goat's milk has a very high level of natural acidity. And so when you turn it into a cheese like this, even though, yes, you get the butteriness and the creaminess and the gooiness, you get a certain tartness still that comes through that I think is just really a nice surprise and really, really delicious. So I'll show you this cheese again. This is the Laura Chanel creamy goat brie. You look like you might have a question for me, honey.
We just had 2 questions. And again, these are great because we've been doing this forever and I've been listening to you forever in a good way, learning all the time. These are both things I hadn't even thought of or heard anybody ask before. So Thomas and Colleen, do the different style of cheeses, Bloomy, Gouda, Blue, et cetera, is the production cost different on each of those cheeses?
For sure.
Expand.
Sure. Yes. So production cost is a massive, massive percentage of overall cost for cheese. So of course you have the material cost, milk and salt and maybe some flavorings. And then you have the facility cost. So you've got to have your vats and your pasteurizers and your aging caves, your aging rooms. But it's really the effort and the labor that goes into some of these cheeses. So some things that will make cheeses more labor intensive is how long they're aged. So if you talk about a cheese, for instance, Gouda was one of the ones that was brought up. It is not inexpensive to make cheese because necessarily the raw materials are need to be a certain quality or because the aging rooms, it's because they can be aged for so long. So when you think about aging a cheese for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, you have got a ton of like effort and like real estate invested in that one wheel of cheese. So if at any point the process derails, if there's a problem in your aging room, if it turns out that your bacteria culture was not what you thought it was, that the recipe that you used just failed and you didn't realize it until 2 years down the road, it's like cataclysmic. So the longer a cheese is aged, the more expensive the process is because you're hanging on to it. And for the longer you hang on to it, you need to care for it. And you need to assume the risk of hanging on to it for that long. So that's one thing that can really amp up the price of a cheese. Another is the delicacy of a cheese. So these cheeses are extraordinarily delicate. I think you can tell just by handling them yourselves, and you're just like handling one, right? So having to produce and flip and wrap and pack and ship these incredibly delicate cheeses is, I mean, needless to say, it's a very, very risky proposition. And there's a lot of loss in that. Cheeses that are that have this style of rind that need to be flipped so much, if there's a temperature variation, if you put too much salt or not enough salt, or there's all these really strange things that can happen. So again, different cheeses will be expensive for different reasons. If you have a truffle cheese, it's going to be expensive because there's truffles inside of it, not necessarily because the milk itself is like this milk, or because it's aged for that long, but the raw material is expensive. So it just depends the style of cheese to which you're referring, that will add to the expense.
Okay, I got another question, but then there's a follow-up to that idea from Thomas and Colleen, and they're asking, a lot of these folks here are younger, and is that because it's easier to get started as a cheesemaker making the fresh cheese if you're younger and you haven't built up a reputation, you don't have a bunch of profits to kind of roll back into the business?
I would say that cheese making has never been a big profit center, right? So you don't go into cheese making to get rich. You go into cheese making because it is truly a labor of love. So yes, young people tend to have a lot of that very essential ingredient, which is energy and passion, to care for animals, to get their milk, to make it into cheese. If you care for the animals, you literally can never have a day off. When you're making cheese from fresh milk 2 times a day, you can't be like, oh, I'm going away for the weekend. You can't do it. So there's a certain commitment that comes with being a cheesemaker that most people would never really understand, because most people don't have truly 7-day-a-week jobs from which they cannot physically depart, or the animals would suffer, or their operation would actually suffer. So youth helps. And also, don't forget, cheese making, while complex and poetic and nuanced and beautiful, it's not really that complicated. It's been happening for thousands of years, most of that time without the assistance of chemical rennets, refrigeration, plastic, cheese molds, all of those things that we take for granted now. For thousands of years, that's how cheese was born. It was born out of the necessity of preservation. So you'd add salt to it and you'd stick it in a cool cave somewhere, and you could eat it in 6 months, which was revolutionary. So it's takes a lot of work and thought, but at the same time is one of the most ancient and reliable forms of making food in the world. Yeah. So it's complex yet not complex. But yes, I would say youth definitely helps, because it's a dirty, hard job that also at the same time requires great sensitivity and delicacy. So it's a difficult balance.
All right. There's another great question I want to come back to, but let's taste this because we're getting on 7 now. Before we do,
here, I'm going to hand that to you.
There is, I liked all the other cheeses better. There is, this is okay with the honey. There is not a fan of the goat brie, barnyard flavor, and I smell ammonia.
No.
So that's what we've gotten here with this.
So first of all, there's no ammonia going on here, at least not in my piece. I will say the rind is more piquant, and it has a certain umami to it that the other ones did not have, and a certain barniness. And that's another characteristic of goat's milk. So goat's milk has a certain enzymes in it that make it sort of a more pronounced, more barny kind of flavor. There's a lot of people that don't like goat's milk because they're like, oh, it tastes barny. And that's just a natural quality of goat's milk. Goat's milk also ages really, really quickly because whereas cow's milk, as I said, has those very long, complex fat chains and protein chains, it can age for a longer period of time. Goat's milk is the exact opposite. Super tiny fat chains and protein chains. They break down really fast. So the cheeses age more quickly and their flavors become more pronounced more quickly. I would say this cheese is it's in perfect condition, not even approaching too ripe. We've had some before where like during class where I was like, oh, that was ripe. I would not classify that as. What I would say is it tastes like a goat cheese.
My reaction is this is by far the most flavorful of the cheeses so far. I think it's exceptional.
It's so good.
But I can understand it's a little bit out there.
It's more of
it's
an
barnyardy.
acquired
It's
taste.
earthy.
It has more of a barny
mushroomy
thing. And you just have to be very careful with goat's milk. You can't let it sit too long. I mean, not that these people are doing that, but I'm saying in general, this is why sometimes people have tasted goat's milk cheeses they find too strong. You can't let it sit for too long before you turn it into the cheese. You can't let the cheese sit around too long before you eat it. It's just much more delicate of a milk, and it's going to bring a lot of personality. So your goat's milk cheeses are full of personality. And this is why even a little delicate, fresh chev sprinkled on a salad will bring so much presence to that, because they are more full flavored for sure.
I can see why people would say, "Oh, it's a little different." I think it's awesome.
All right, for sure.
So we should move on to the next cheese. But while you're starting to do that, let me ask you this question from Zach Evers.
Please.
It's great. So he's saying, and he prefaces it by saying he's genuine curiosity. He's not trying to be a wise guy. What is the advantage of non-animal rennet?
It's a great question.
If what you're using is already an animal milk,
right?
Cow milk, in the case we were talking about.
So the reason people consider animal rennet not vegetarian, of course, these are all made from animal products, so none of them are vegan, right? We're talking about vegetarian. So the reason they would not consider it vegetarian is because an animal dies in the process, right? So the rennet is derived from the stomach lining of an animal. Now, there's no animal on earth that is sacrificed merely for its stomach lining for rennet. You could look at this almost on the flip side as using every part of an animal that is possible. So the animal is sacrificed for meat purposes, and one of the resulting products there is the rennet that is derived from, again, the stomach acid, the stomach lining of the animal. So that is why people who are more strict vegetarians would say that does not fit into my model for my vegetarianism. And then there are other vegetarians that have no problem with that because they're not consuming necessarily, the animal itself. And then some people are like, well, it's just, everyone has got their own sort of like position on it. A lot of people are fine with it. A lot of people are not. So that's why it could be a little bit conflicting. One of the benefits of non-animal rennet is they're much more shelf stable. They're much more easy to come by. They're less expensive. They last longer. They're more predictable. So there's a lot of production benefit from using sort of a plant-based rennet. But cheesemakers, a lot of cheesemakers will argue it doesn't give you the same authentic texture and sort of in flavor and palate experience as using traditional animal rennet.
Okay, I want to move on to the next one, but there's a couple. Zach was thankful. He said, great explanation.
Okay.
So there's a couple of follow-ups on the quote ammonia thing. They were saying it doesn't taste like it. It smells like it. Now, what I want to offer is I don't get it at all, but when I eat the piece of cheese and there's something like that is almost
it's a
like
little more nasal. It gets in
there's
the
a nasal
more.
thing. I think that's what people are experiencing.
Yeah. In the term like ammoniated, when a cheese is ammoniated, it means that the rind or the cheese itself has basically died, right? So it's died and it is emitting.
Breaking down.
Yeah. And so it's compared to the smell of ammonia, and it gets in your eyes really, and you can feel it in your nose. It's unpleasant. This is definitely more of a piquant rind, and it can have to do with the mold that is used in this rind or the mold combined with the goat cheese within. But it definitely gets a little bit more. For sure, it was more piquant. But when you have like an ammoniated cheese, it
kind of knocks you over.
Oh, you know it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You go to eat it, and your face just goes, no, thank you. It's like this animal response.
This is not that.
It's just more piquant, and these other ones were incredibly delicate.
Yeah, and light. Yeah.
All right, so let's move on because I hate to keep you guys over, and I'm already a couple minutes over. So this is our final cheese of the evening. This is a cheese, I love the name of it. It's called a Moses Sleeper. And Moses Sleeper is from one of my favorite cheesemakers in the entire world, much less in the United States, called Jasper Hill Farm. And Jasper Hill Farm is the famous makers of Bailey Hayes and Blue and Alpha Tolman and Moses Sleeper and Harbison. And there's like, they make a bunch of different cheeses and they're really beautiful. So this is modeled after a French style brie. I'll give you your wedge there. It's made from pasteurized cow's milk, again, up in Greensboro, Vermont. So this farm was founded by Andy and Mateo Keller, who are brothers, who grew up in that area. And they lamented the fact as they became adults that the region they had grown up in had just essentially fallen into disrepair. So the world of agriculture had fallen apart up in that part of the country. There wasn't much other industry. And it had become one of those towns that had just started, like the blight had started. And they said, this will not stand. We don't want this to happen to the place where we grew up. And so they actually intentionally returned to Greensboro, founded Jasper Hill Farm, and now they are one of the biggest employers in that entire region because they employ all the people who they grow all of their own, everything. Did you put up the picture?
I did. What
they actually grow their own hay. I mean, this goes beyond, right? They don't just care for the animals and get the milk and make the cheese. They actually grow their own controlled strain of hay that they think makes their animals the happiest and makes the most flavorful milk. So for the cold season, they feed their animals some hay, but it comes from their own property and they do that themselves. And they collect the milk, they make the cheese, and they age the cheese there. And they went one step further than that because they realized how hard it was to be an artisan cheesemaker here in the United States. It's a very expensive project. And one of the most expensive parts of it is the aging process. You need the facilities to age. It's a big investment to hang on to cheeses. So they built this incredibly huge aging facility where they have just welcomed in all of these other small American cheesemakers to bring their cheeses there and age them. So you can make your cheese and then you can bring it to Jasper Hill Cellars and have a partnership with them where they age it for you. It's unbelievable. This is the greatest thing in the world. So this is Jasper Hill, and this is Moses Sleeper. It's aged for about 8 weeks and has just a really nice sort of buttery, cool flavor and texture.
It's awesome. Mm-hmm. Some folks said that theirs is a little gooier. And then somebody asked if the marble slab keeps the cheeses from getting gooey.
So marble is a great cheese material because it won't get too warm. You want your cheeses to be at room temperature, but you don't want them to get like warm. So marble is just cool enough that it helps to kind of keep them maintained at that. So it tends to be a really great, God, that's good. It's like celery. That's yummy. So this is Moses Sleeper. This is the biggest of our cheeses. It weighs 1 pound. And it's just a work of art. It just even says Bloomy rind on the label. I don't know if you can see that.
It was pretty cool in that one barn, not the red barn, but the barn next to it. Mm-hmm. In the picture, they drew like
the space. Oh,
thing.
It's gorgeous.
Pretty neat.
It's so picturesque. Very cold up there.
Liz thinks it tastes like broccoli.
I'll give you that. Yep, I said celery. You're actually right. It's more of like a broccoli cauliflower thing. Mm-hmm.
Cruciferous cheese. All right, I'm going to put up the poll.
Okay. We always like to do a poll.
Is running
at the end of class. I know what's not going to be the winner, but pick your favorite from tonight. Is it Mount Tam? Is it Bloomy Breeze? Is it St. Stephen? Is it Creamy Goat Brie? Or is it Moses Sleeper? It's a tough run, I think. I mean, I hate to influence the results, but I'm pretty certain it's not going to be number 4, just based on the questions. But
I'm just wondering if anybody will vote for number 4. Let's see.
Somebody will. So our next class, that cheese with that tastes like cherries. If you haven't already tasted that together, please do so.
Somebody said they're not in order. They're only not in order with St. Stephen and...
did I put them in there out of order? I'm sorry.
I think so, but
sometimes I move stuff around. So
yeah, the only thing that's out of order is the Bloomy Breeze and the St. Stephen. They're just...
Okay. So go, based on the names that you have on your handout. So 1 is Mount Tam, 2 is Bloomy Breeze, 3 is St. Stephen, 4 is the creamy brie from Laura Chanel, and 5 is the Moses Sleeper. So I'll take just a moment while the poll results are finishing.
We're waiting for one person. I've never noticed this before, but everybody but one person has voted this time.
Okay.
All right, you go.
So our next class topic has not been finalized yet, but I will be back with you very soon about that. As always, I will email you all tomorrow with a link where you can purchase all of these items online. We still have everything in stock, so this would be a great time to grab some of those items. And also it will have a link to our next class. So you'll have all that info before you know it. And also there will be a link to watch the class again. So if you're just joining us now or halfway through and you want to watch from the beginning, in about a half hour, go to cheeseteak.com/previous classes, and you'll have a link there.
So Thomas and Colleen want a truffle cheese class.
Oh, okay.
Truffle cheese. We've done that, haven't we?
I feel like we have done a truffle cheese. It's been a really long time. And I think, Thomas and Colleen, you're onto something there. I mean, who doesn't love truffles?
Ooh, yeah. All right. I'm going to publish the poll.
Publish the poll, baby.
Share results, publish. Okay.
Number 1.
So what do you think?
For number 1, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say St. Stephen.
That wasn't a limb. That was correct.
Was it correct?
Yeah. I feel like that's where people got the most reaction. It was like the first 2 were like, this is great. This is great.
So
and
great.
Then everybody went, whoa.
Whoa, right? Even I'll be honest, like I eat this cheese all the time, but not ever like this. I mean, like I'm not that crazy, right? I don't like have a buffet of creamy, dreamy cheeses all the time. So if you eat this independently, you're like, damn, that's good. But when you eat it as part of the spectrum, it totally jumped out at me as being exceptionally delicious. Okay, what was number 2?
Really good. Oh, number 2.
Mount Tam?
No, by a smidge, Bloomy Breeze.
Okay.
Then Mount Tam.
So proud of Bloomy Breeze. Local. Go local.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah, that's cool. That was good stuff.
Wonderful. Then maybe Mount Tam?
Yeah.
Okay. And then Moses, I'm guessing. Did anyone vote for, don't tell Laura Chanel. She'll be heartbroken. That's okay. She's had a lot of success. She's good. All right. Any final questions before we wrap up for the evening?
Best way to store the cheeses.
Yes. So if you have cheeses left over, like we do, obviously, please listen to what I'm about to tell you. Do not wrap them in saran wrap. Don't do it. Take a Tupperware container or a glass lidded container, whatever you have at home. Take the lid off. Put the cheese inside. No wrapping of any kind. Just put it right inside and put a lid on it and seal it and put it in your refrigerator. It will create this beautiful little ecosystem inside. It will keep the cheeses cool enough, but they won't be like a victim to your harsh, blowing, cold, dry air from your refrigerator. But you also do not ever want to wrap these in saran wrap because they will suffocate and die. So put them in a lidded container. It's less work for you. Put the lid on it and you can put them all in there together and pop it in the fridge. And just remember, next time you eat them, leave them out for like a half hour so they come to room temperature. These are not cheeses. You don't ever want to eat cheese when it's cold, but especially these, they were just no good.
We're getting a couple of folks in the end here who are feeling bad and saying that they like the goat brie too.
I also like
the goat brie a lot.
It was a different.
It was great though.
Sure.
I think
for
so.
Sure.
So last question and we'll finish.
Sure.
Leah wants to know what other cheeses from 4 Fat Fowl do you recommend?
Oh my gosh. If you can get, we have it at the shop sometimes. It's harder to get. They're super, super tiny. So is a cheese called Camembertha.
Yeah, that's funny.
Isn't that fabulous? Yeah. So it's like a camembert, but it's their own take on it. It's unbelievable. So it's going to be more, it's going to have a lot of the characteristics of this, but it's going to be more umphy, more like a camembert compared to a brie. So Camembertha.
We should try to get that in soon and email the folks.
Yeah, and if we get this one in soon, if we get Camembertha in soon, I'll email you all and I'll be like, hey, you got to try this.
Awesome.
For sure.
All right. Until next time.
All right. Thank you. Mwah. I appreciate you all being here. I'm so excited to eat more of these cheeses tonight. We'll see you for our next class. Just watch your email and I'll get you guys the sneak peek so you can sign up first. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you for joining us and we'll see you next time.